In business today, three things to know. First, the Fed begins its two-day meeting. Will Janet Yellen spring any surprises on the markets when it comes to interest rates? Then, it's a field trip to the United Nations for countries around the world as the General Assembly opens. On the agenda, Ebola, ISIS, and a whole lot of world conflicts. And beer war. Major breweries are getting together so they can dominate your drinking time. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Late this afternoon, President Obama pledged to send 3,000 troops to West Africa to fight Ebola. The troops will build treatment clinics and train healthcare workers who are fighting the worst outbreak of the deadly virus in history. So far, the death toll stands at 2,461 people, mostly in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Ebola is also a pressing issue, of course, as the United Nations General Assembly prepares to meet. And later this half hour, we'll speak with our reporter, Frank Ucciardo, from the UN. Stocks rallied as the Dow finished at record highs this Tuesday as the Federal Reserve began its two-day meeting. Here are the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closing up triple digits, 183 to 17,131.97. That is a record. The S&P 500 up 1485. And the NASDAQ up 33.86 to 45.52. Some of the stocks we're watching today. United Parcel Service is hiring almost twice the number of seasonal employees than it did last year. The world's largest parcel delivery company says it's hiring 90 to 95,000 workers. UPS closing up 34 cents. Sears says it's borrowing $400 million that it desperately needs from the hedge fund run by its chief executive officer and its largest shareholder. After burning through cash over the summer, Sears reported losses of nearly $1 billion. Sears down $315 to 30 and change. And shares of home soda maker SodaStream sizzling today after news the company could be purchased by a British investment fund for more than $800 million. That's according to an Israeli newspaper. SodaStream is denying the reports, and SodaStream closing up 31 cents. Taking a look at commodities, gold up 80 cents and oil up $1.86. That helped the markets today as well. As we mentioned, Janet Yellen and the Fed began their two-day meeting, and interest rates always at the top of the agenda, at least for us who likes to talk about interest rates. Jim Awad, chairman of Plimsoll Mark Capital, is back here on Arise Exchange with his take. Jim, they're talking, and all of the commentators are out there wondering, of course, what are they going to do, and are they going to? They're not raising interest rates. Right. But they may change the language of how they talk about interest rates, which is usually a prelude of them doing something.
Right. Well, I think everybody has an understanding of what the roadmap is, and the consensus is that they will start raising rates in June of 2015, raise them through the end of 17, and probably go from 0 to 300 basis points during that period. But I think the feeling on Wall Street is we need a little bit more time. The most recent economic data have turned a little bit mixed, and the market is worried that if they raise rates too soon, you might kill the recovery. So the two things to look at tomorrow are the considerable time phrase. They're about to wind down the quantitative easing, and they've
another
said
$10 million cut, and that will put them at
I believe that leaves you one more month, the end of October. And what the market wants to know is, what the market would like to see is stable interest rates through next June. And the second thing, and so you want to see if they keep considerable time in there. And the second, if they can, when they comment on the labor markets, do they comment that they remain underutilized and weak, because that goes hand in hand with leaving interest rates low for a while. So those are the two things you want to look at.
Have we seen any negative impact in them cutting back on the asset purchase?
No, absolutely not.
And I agree, right? It's really been a non-issue, hasn't it?
Well, in fact, interest rates have on balance gone down while they've been doing that, because the economy hasn't been so strong as to cause interest rates to go up. And secondly, you have all these problems in Europe, and their interest rates are so low, so people want to buy U.S. Treasuries. So, no, they've gotten out of QE2 or QE3.
Whichever QE it is.
We're through that. Now what you want to make sure is that the interest rate glide path does not derail the economy or the financial markets.
And the continued criticism out there is that they're behind the curve on inflation. But this is really something you're just not going to know until you see it.
Right, absolutely. And the data today on inflation would indicate that they're not behind the curve. But that is the risk. I mean, that's what the bears on the other side. Some don't want to see them raise rates for killing the economy, and some want them to raise rates so we don't get inflation. That's the other side of the curve.
And as far as killing the economy, though, I mean, you know, the argument here is, and we saw the market go up triple digits today because they obviously believe they're not going to do anything tomorrow.
Right.
Where, you know, how much of it is it the economy or is it the asset bubble that they're worried about?
Well, the people who want rates to go up now, who want it sooner rather than later, are afraid of both inflation and the potential that we're in an asset bubble, and they could be related to each other. And then those on the other side who want them to wait are afraid that the economy doesn't have enough strength. So Yellen has to walk down the middle of that.
And of course, according to the government, the numbers they use to produce price index, for example, flat, no real signs of inflation in their world. Obviously, you and I, and the supermarket and the gas pump maybe have a different perspective on this. You know, the Census Bureau out with this report on poverty rate and showing that the poverty rate dropped for the first time in 7 years. It's a nominal drop. 7 years. We're in a recovery, but what kind of recovery?
Well, it's been a very slow and weak recovery. It's been a capital recovery that has benefited the owners of capital, the owners of assets. We all know that employment has come back slower than expected, wage growth has been lower than expected, and it has been a recovery of the well-to-do. And the not well-to-do are still struggling, so those numbers don't surprise me at all.
And, you know, the companies are sitting on so much cash, though. So when does that kind of come into the equation, when companies will spend the cash on something other than share buybacks,
right,
which it really doesn't help?
Well, that's the key. To those who think the economy is going to do better from here, it's that businesses will start to capital spend because they have the confidence to do that. But the evidence so far on that subject is very mixed. That is what has to happen to get beyond the 2.5% growth rate. It's very debatable right now, the evidence for and against that.
And finally, what would the Fed say tomorrow that would spook the markets?
Well, if they led the markets to believe that they're going to pull forward the interest rate increase from June of 15 to somewhere between March, February, something like that, the markets are not ready for that. Incidentally, I think the markets would get over it after a short-term hiccup, but for tomorrow, the markets are not yet ready for it.
Jim Awad, always terrific. Thank you.
Always my pleasure.
World leaders are gathering at a place in New York known as Turtle Bay, the home of the United Nations. The meeting of the General Assembly will feature the usual cast of characters with a lot on their plate, from Ebola to ISIS to, get this, Leonardo DiCaprio. We'll explain that one in a moment. Frank Ucciardo is at the United Nations and joins us with the latest. Frank, why don't you give us an overview of what we expect out of this GA meeting?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Of course, the official debate doesn't really start till the 24th next week, but you have this climate change summit before that. The day before, President Obama will be at the summit. He's going to try to help craft a declaration which will be kind of a politically binding statement that will name and shame a lot of the major emitters of greenhouse gases and try to shame them into doing something about it. It's not legally binding, but it's aimed at targeting these people to actually do something. And of course, once he is done with that, we have the general debate the next day on the 24th. Mr. Obama, after he gives his speech in the General Assembly, which we of course expect he will touch upon the Ebola crisis, the situation in the Middle East between the Palestinians and Israel, and of course what's going on in Ukraine and with the Russian intervention there. But once he gets done with that, he's going to step down the hall, he's going to go to the UN Security Council, and he's going to address a very important topic, that is terrorism. He's going to try to get through a resolution. And this resolution will basically do is it's going to ask all the member states to try to prevent the recruitment and the transport of any foreign fighters who may go and join terrorist groups like ISIS. So we have a very busy start to the week next week, and of course along the way in the General Assembly there will be plenty of issues they'll be dealing with that will include, of course, sustainable development, the environment, and of course the outbreak of Ebola.
Yeah, I have to ask you, because we were talking about this earlier, a lot of the action at the UN sort of happens behind the scenes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. You know, if there's a deal to be done, you're not going to see it in the General Assembly. That's basically speaking to the home crowd back in their countries. You know, there's very little news that happens there. There's some theatrics like you might have had with the Prime Minister from Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, last year, who's of course going to be again here this year, along with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. And one of the things on the sidelines is going to be talked about, it's already started, is the six parties talks with Iran. And those talks, as you probably know, are aimed at limiting Iran's nuclear capability. It's already begun here in New York. It's going to be going on throughout the GA, and they're hoping to come out with some kind of success this time around, Andrew.
All right, I have to ask you about the most pressing issue going on at the United Nations. I understand that Leonardo DiCaprio has been cast in a special role at the UN. What is Leo doing?
Yeah, he's been named a UN Messenger of Peace. It's the same title that actor Michael Douglas has, and he's going to make an appearance right away. He's going to make it during the Climate Change Summit. He's going to be there with President Obama. He's going to address not the General Assembly, because he's not a delegate. He can't really legally do that, but he's going to address the Climate Summit here in New York, and he's going to speak about the environment. That's something that's very near and dear to his heart.
Yeah, we should say that Leo has donated several $1 million to UN causes, possibly to get the job. You will be there, obviously, all for the next 2 weeks or so, Frank, and we look forward to your reports. Thank you. Frank Ucciardo at the United Nations. Coming up, did the state of Vermont ban your kids from eating brownies at school? You're watching Arise Exchange. Last week on Arise Exchange, the 13th anniversary of 9/11 unfolded the way the others have, with memorials and moments of silence. The Ray Rice fallout, the cost to the Baltimore Ravens and the NFL.
For them to deal with it the way they did, they clearly dropped the ball.
You know what we need protection from? People who wear Elmo costumes. The government forcing people who dress as SpongeBob SquarePants to get licensed. Maybe they need to say shrink. I don't know about SpongeBob. Watch this week for more Arise Exchange.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. Time now for our business ticker stories making headlines across the nation and the world. The Obama administration says health care reform is leading to more insured Americans. The latest from a new government report says the number of people without health insurance fell 8% to 41 million in the first quarter of the year. That's a drop of 4 million since benefits started to kick in. Flight attendants at United Airlines may get a six-figure bonus to walk away from their jobs. United Airlines is offering thousands of them buyouts worth as much as $100,000 each. United has been trying to downsize the fleet since its merger with Continental. What could be the biggest IPO in history just got bigger. Demand for Alibaba's initial public offering is so strong that the Chinese online shopping giant just increased its initial price to as much as $68 a share. The new price adds $7 billion to its proposed market cap, making it worth as much as $170 billion. Alibaba is expected to start trading on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange on Friday, and we will cover that here on Exchange. Atlantic City has lost another casino. The Trump Plaza closed its doors today, becoming the fourth casino in Atlantic City to go belly up so far. Trump Plaza had been the town's worst performing casino for years, and the latest to fall victim to competition from neighboring states and saturated East Coast gambling markets. However, according to a tweet by Donald Trump, the real estate mogul may rescue the property that bears his name, even though, as he likes to keep reminding us, he has had nothing to do with the casino for years. And America's most infamous receipt is now on the auction block. As we reported last week in our favorite person of the day segment, Philadelphia Eagles running back LaShawn McCoy was publicly called out for leaving a 20-cent tip at a local burger joint on a $60-something bill. Well, now a signed copy of the receipt is being sold on eBay. Of course it is. The bid started at 20 cents. But get this, at last check, the top bid was now over $99,000. The waitress should have held on to the receipt. Cell phones and chewing gum aren't the only things banned at public schools in Vermont. Selling brownies is now added to that list. Yeah, brownies. The popular baked treat has been replaced by kale bars, fruit shish kebabs, whatever those are, and gluten-free lemon bars. It's part of a new nutrition mandate called Smart Snacks in School. Jill Remick is the Vermont Agency of Education Communications Director and joins us by phone. Jill, thank you for stopping by Arise Exchange and trying to explain this policy. Okay, we all agree our nation's kids need to eat better and lose weight and exercise more. So what's behind this policy?
Sure. So this is what schools need to agree to be complying with as part of being part of the National School Lunch Program. And as you said, it really is about things that are for sale at schools. It certainly doesn't mean that my daughter or anybody else can't bring along whatever they'd like in their lunch. If parents want to send in cupcakes or brownies for a birthday, they can still do that. This is really about during the school day, not having either, bake sales or vending machines that sell things that are really not healthy for kids.
Does that mean you can't do on-school bake sales to raise money for, I don't know, the football team or the book club or the chess club? Or bake sales now out?
No, you could do those. You could do those after school. You could do them at the games. You could do them anytime 30 minutes after the school day. But you wouldn't be able to hold them in the cafeteria. You certainly could have bake sales that have certain, that meet these nutritional requirements. But the goal is really, the kids that we are trying to help here are kids who really can't afford to bring, whether it's good for them or not, food to school. And they really are showing up at school hungry. And so part of the reason that we're really excited about this program is we're making sure that at least for that time that those kids are at school, they're getting something nutritional, which is not necessarily the case once they leave.
Yeah, it is true that too many kids get their best meal, and some kids maybe their only meal at school, correct?
That's right. That's exactly right.
How big of a problem is that?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jill. I was just wondering how big of a problem that is in Vermont.
Well, it's significant. Obesity and then all the diseases and the health problems that come along with obesity. Vermont is not unique in that by any means. Dental, kids having pretty serious dental problems pretty early in their lives with, their baby teeth before they're even fully formed and have their adult teeth. They certainly aren't able to learn or participate in school or participate in activities when they are not nourished correctly.
What have you found so far? I've never had a kale bar. I do have kale shakes, and they're pretty good when you mix them with banana. But have you found the kids actually taking advantage of this, though? Because it's one thing to put it in front of them, kale bars and fruit shish kebabs, but are they actually eating it?
Well, that was one principal in Vermont who said that when she was interviewed by a reporter. So more power to her. I don't know that I could get my daughter to eat a kale bar. Some of the other things that are allowed on here are things like fruit, popcorn, smoothies, granola bars. All these things are things that kids eat regularly, and those are certainly allowed.
Joe, what about the education component, though? Because it's one thing to sort of like compel kids in some ways to eat this food, but it's another to try to give them sort of the lifelong lessons of eating better and also the component of exercise and playing sports.
Oh, exactly. I mean, that's critical. And giving them these choices, this is certainly, they're not required to buy or do any of these things, but to learn to sort of make those healthy choices, to learn that maybe if you have a healthier snack at lunchtime, then maybe you'll be better off in the afternoon when you want to go play football or ride your bike. If you want to be, reading or participating in activities in the classroom, you're going to have a better time of it. And not only that, but it builds some really good lifelong habits. And Joe,
we're talking about snacks here, but what about the main meals? I mean, school meals tend to be starchy and cheap. What are you doing about that?
Yeah, I think in Vermont, it's actually been pretty amazing. We have, we're little enough that we have local farms that participate with their local schools. There are actually schools that have farms. So, we have kids who get fresh vegetables at their school every day. They get local milk. They get a lot of really good nutritious things from nearby. We're probably unique in that because we are so small, we can do that. But our school meals here now are much better than they were when I was in school 15 years ago.
Okay, Jill Remick, a beautiful time of the year, by the way, up in Vermont. Everybody should visit.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Ahead, our favorite person of the day says he was too high or simply out of his mind to know he stole someone else's song. You're watching Arise Exchange.
I think that people in America do care about what happens throughout the world.
Global warming is probably something that has to be addressed sooner rather than later.
From Somalia and the genocide there, and that's something people don't know about. They have no idea the brevity of that situation.
The first thing I think about when I think of Africa is like war and famine and disease.
And right now with the tsunami that happened or the earthquakes in, Japan, we always look out for other people.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Two liquid lunches today that will make you want to drink and possibly have the dead roll over too. First, for us busy professionals who don't have time to go to a funeral, one funeral home is now offering drive-through viewing. Take a look. The Paradise Funeral Chapel Home in Saginaw, Michigan, has installed a drive-through window, allowing people to pay their respects without ever getting out of the car. The home says this allows mourners to pay their respects when they normally would not be able to because some people don't like to visit funeral homes. Each car gets 3 minutes at the window, and then they have to move on. At least no one is asking, do you want fries with that? Then, what happens to our loved ones when they go to the grave? Well, if they end up at one Spanish cemetery, they may get their picture taken with a gravedigger. One cemetery worker posed for a picture with a man who has been dead for 23 years. He dug him up. Why? Because the dead man's nephew wanted to take a photo with the departed. Even stranger, the person who took the photo is believed to be the dead man's niece. Dead men tell no tales. The cemetery worker, by the way, has been suspended. Only suspended. And that takes us to our favorite person of the day when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, it is Robin Thicke, who is accused of ripping off a Marvin Gaye song, and that when he took credit for it in the press, he, quote, didn't do one interview last year without being high. Thicke is being sued by the family of the late Marvin Gaye for allegedly stealing Gaye's 1977 hit, Got to Give It Up, when he wrote Blurred Lines. Thicke says that comments he made about being inspired by Gaye were wrong and that he was taking more credit for the song than he deserved, but he did so because he was, quote, high on Vicodin and alcohol for most of 2013, so he wasn't really sure what he was doing. In fact, Thicke says he barely remembers recording the song, that he can't remember the date of the recording session or even the number of times he spoke to the press when he took credit for the song, all because he was stoned out of his mind. Thicke now says he lied about claiming Gaye's hit song inspired him. That, in fact, he says Pharrell Williams wrote the whole thing. He even lied to Oprah because he had taken the drug called Norco, a narcotic twice as powerful as Vicodin. And so Robin Thicke is our favorite person of the day. Next, a beer war is brewing. You're watching Arise Exchange. Global. It's Monday, so it must be time for a new round of sanctions against Russia. Nigeria is open for business, and you are getting a handle on this situation. Compelling. Time for liquid lunch, things that make us want to drink. Could she have been separated at birth from, say, Grimace? All business.
Money's coming out of these countries, and that flow is part of what's driving the equity markets.
Entertaining money daily.
It's about reimagining.
Arise Exchange.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
It is one serious drinking game. I give Dan, our floor manager, credit for that line. It's the battle of the breweries after the world's third largest brewery, Heineken, rejected a takeover bid by its rival, SAB Miller. And there's more to the story. Anheuser-Busch wants to buy SAB Miller as well. Heineken, valued at more than $44 billion, says it wants to stay independent. The Heineken family controls over 50% of the voting shares and holds a minority stake in the company. To tell us more what all of this means to the beer industry and all of us beer drinkers is Tom Pirko, president of BevMark. Tom, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Hi, how are you?
All right, so, what is going on here with these giant breweries wanting to get together? I mean, does anyone even drink Miller beer anymore?
Oh, sure. But I mean, this is, to keep some perspective here, this is chump change because, if this deal doesn't go through, I think after Thursday they're going to buy Scotland. That's weird.
That's pretty good, Tom. You're bringing it today.
Yeah,
good.
It's kind of hard to follow up on your past stories. I've been listening here, and I'm not stoned out of my mind, and I don't do drive-by interviews, but I'll try to carry on anyway.
Yeah. No, we'll still let you on the show.
The deal's colossal. The deal is, some of us in the business, and we worked with AB and Miller and Heineken, et cetera, and I can tell you sometimes we view them more as a bank than a brewer. Putting these deals together one on top of another is really, it's people always talk about this stereotype of globalization, but what it really comes down to is companies that, in a sense, take over the world for their category.
Well,
to get momentum going, the banks want to dive in and do it with them.
And Tom,
it's pretty hard to stop.
Tom, you mentioned this as they're like more of a bank than a brewery, but aren't they actually more a trucking company than a brewery? Isn't a lot of this about distribution and access to supermarkets?
It's about power. It's about controlling your market. It's about ABI is a very good cost cutter, but what they're really doing here is putting themselves in a position with 8 out of the top 10 beer brands in the world. They're putting themselves in a position where they can control, and I'll use that word carefully because there are antitrust implications, but where they can really manage pricing and margins in a way to ensure their profitability. And this whole concept of globalization really has to do with bigger party wins. You can just simply dominate, and there are antitrust considerations, which we can talk about in a second if you like. But this is really about being so big that you can
drive prices,
control your destiny.
Well, and I'm wondering, do they really have that much pricing power? Because do people buy beer based on how much it costs, or by what category they like?
Absolutely.
They do.
There are different breakdowns in the beer business. A lot of people buy the cheapest beer possible. One of the reasons why people aren't making money in China right now is because beer is so cheap. But if you control production and distribution, you're in the position then to also move on to premium and super premium brands where everyone wants to be. But the idea is you're so big, you're so powerful that your nearest competitor really can't challenge you, and then you can start to set price.
Okay, and let's address the antitrust rules, because among the pricing is also sort of the distribution. I used to speak to the owners of the Brooklyn Brewery, and they said to me they didn't know they had to go into the trucking business, and that's why I raised the question, because it's hard to get into the stores.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, the first thing you do is you control how beer is not necessarily made. When there's not enough breweries to corner parts of the country and parts of the market, but you've got to get this stuff into the stores and into the bars and the restaurants. And you have two very large in the U.S., for instance, two very large organizations. You have the AB system and the Miller Coors system. And if you're not part of that, then you're out, in the streets sort of carrying cases to individual accounts, trying to get them to put it on the shelves in the cooler.
Yeah, do you think these combinations hurt the sort of microbreweries, the craft breweries more, or does it help them at all by the customer looking for something a little bit different and that's not sort of made, on so much of quantity?
I think it does both. I think it separates out. This is commercial beer, and some of these beers are very good. I don't want to downplay Stella Artois or some of these Corona or whatever, but you essentially have a whole other kind of beer drinking experience. But right now, that whole segment is very fragmented, and it's not looked at that seriously by the global giants simply because they're out there using their economics to win the game. So the smaller beers can offer you pleasure, but there are way too many of them. It's a little bit like the wine business. Go into your average store, and I live in California, and you have whole rows full of wine, and who can sort out 250 different Chardonnays? That same thing happens in the beer business with the craft beers.
Okay, Tom Pirko, president of BevMark. Thank you so much as always.
Don't forget about Scotland.
Talk to you soon. And speaking of Scotland, we will cover that vote on Thursday. Tomorrow on Xchange, a global oil surplus is driving U.S. crude prices to new lows. How long will that last? We will, of course, also cover tomorrow the second day of Janet Yellen's Fed meeting, and we'll find out what they're going to do about interest rates and what they have to say. Let's take a quick look at the markets. Once again, that is a record day for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Rise Exchange. We will see you tomorrow.